they have this conception that the Bible is very sex negative. And so they're very surprised when, I tell them, the very first commandment God ever gave anyone is sexual, like, right? To be fruitful and multiply, that he tells them, right? My name is Dr. Jacobson. I am a clinical psychologist, sex therapist, and Bible scholar. And I also do biblical archaeology, which is a lot of fun. I am in Germany, which is surprising, right? Like with my accent. And I have been here since 2018.
Great.
I also should say I host a very popular podcast called the Sex Therapy Podcast.
Yes, and I've listened to it now that I found you, and it's great. So I can attest to that. There's a lot of episodes, so there's
a lot. Yes, we're getting close to our 100th episode. I'm very excited.
Now, how does everything, your degrees and all of your knowledge, how does it all? Because it sounds like it doesn't fit together, but
it sounds so mutually exclusive, right? But it does.
But it does. And listening to your podcast, I'm like, duh, this makes so much sense. So if you could explain how you put the pieces together to kind of get to where you are now and how it fits.
Sure. So I'll go back. I was working on my master's degree, and my first internship was with the Army Substance Abuse Program. And so I was working with young soldiers who with substance abuse issues or things of this nature. Believe it or not, there are a lot of sexual issues that are related to substance abuse. So I had young people coming to me asking me questions. I say young, they're about the same age as I was, but they're asking me questions about like STIs, or can you contract gonorrhea from whatever they did. And they were telling me stuff.
This is in the US?
This is still in the US, yeah.
Okay.
And so they're telling me stuff they did, and I had no idea what they were talking about. Like, I had no idea what some of the terms they were using. I mean, I knew what gonorrhea was, but some of the terms of some of the activities that they were doing, I had no idea what it was, right? And so of course, I asked my parents, right? Like, that's like, where do you go to? My family's very open about discussing things. And my mother, she worked as a nurse in a psych hospital, and she specialized in forensics. So she worked with a lot of survivors of sexual abuse and trauma. And so I thought, well, I don't know much about sex. And sexuality is a big part of who we are as humans, right? Like, I mean, it's the way that we view our world through our sexuality, and the way that the world views us, and the way that we interact with each other in relationships. And I didn't have much training at the university. Like, I think I might have had 2 or 3 human sexuality classes. Like, that's not a lot. Like, I'm talking from bachelor's to the end of a PsyD program. Like, there wasn't a lot. And so it really encouraged me to pursue additional education to become a sex therapist. So that's kind of how that part played in. And then, because of my work in biblical studies, I was able to really work with a lot of people from religious backgrounds. I approach therapy from a very holistic perspective. So, we're talking physical, mental, spiritual. All of these are important components of who we are. So I understood that as a religious client, especially if you're really froom, talking about sex is not always so easy, and it introduces its own sexual issues. So I that's kind of how they kind of came together.
I'm curious, like, who are your clients? Or, I mean, obviously not names.
Well, I'm not going to tell you their names.
Yeah, not names, but like, what kinds of people come to you, and when does someone say, like, hey, it's time to go see a sex therapist? Like, what brings them to you usually?
Yeah, so I see a very interesting group of folks. Like,
I would think, yeah.
No, I love my client. I specialize in working with religious clients, and not. This is usually a problem in sex therapy, because most sex therapists don't know anything about religion or religious clients or anything like that. And a lot of times their advice is, oh, your religion's a cult, you need to leave. Like, it's oppressive, it's sex negative, you need to leave.
Oh, yes. I remember you talking to Batsheva about this on your podcast, how
this makes me so angry. Like,
yeah.
This upsets me so much, right? So I don't subscribe to that notion at all. So I see a lot of religious clients. So people who are religious come to me because they know I'm not going to tell them something crazy like this. And I try to incorporate their religious beliefs into the therapeutic process. So whether they're an Orthodox Jew and we talk about, let's see if, if your rabbi will allow for us to, let's say the turn on issue, right? So let's say if the rabbi will allow you to wear something for your husband to be excited by, or he'll allow you to listen to erotic stories to get you turned on, whatever the case may be. Like we can find solutions in working through this, like early ejaculation. Sometimes we can get permission. Some rabbis will allow them to wear a con. Another thing in Judaism, for people who don't know, you typically cannot, all contraception is allowed except for condoms, because he cannot ejaculate inside the vagina. But a lot of times the rabbi will say, this will help make it where he doesn't ejaculate so quickly. So put a few holes in the condom and that's okay. So it's like
creative.
Yeah, I mean, it's about finding creative solutions. Or, I work with a lot of Muslim clients, and, for them, especially in the Middle East, the attitudes around sex are kind of restrictive. Like you cannot even see it on television, or like holding hands or kissing, right? So sometimes it's just about finding creative ways for the couples to connect and incorporating their religious beliefs about sex, that sex is something in both Judaism and Islam that is holy and should be elevated, and doing things to meet those ends. And so I love working with the religious clients. I also work with a lot of men on issues like of ED, early ejaculation, delayed ejaculation, and a lot of couples as well. I work with a lot of couples. Yeah, but I work with a lot of women. I work with a lot of women too, but it always changes. Like, so sometimes it feels like I have mostly men. Sometimes it feels more women heavy.
What are like misconceptions that people have about the Bible and sex, or Judaism and sex? I know that's a big question, but maybe just like a few that come to mind.
Sure. So with the Bible and sex, I think a lot of people have this, especially non-religious people, and maybe some religious people, they have this conception that the Bible is very sex negative. And so they're very surprised when, I tell them, the very first commandment God ever gave anyone is the sexual, like, right, to be fruitful and multiply, that he tells them, right? And so this idea that sex is something foreign to the Bible, or as you talked about earlier, there is this like the two are mutually exclusive, like sexuality and religion are mutually exclusive. And I find that to be very common. Like a lot of people think that, and then they think it's very sex negative. So with the sex negative, I also say that the Bible isn't. Like, you have entire books of the Bible that are donated to sexual, or that revolve around sexual themes. I mean, yes, the Bible does have boundaries concerning sex, but boundaries in all of our relationships are healthy. And so boundaries do not equal sex negativity. So that would be mostly sex in the Bible. When it comes to sex in Judaism, I think a misconception is that, or something that people are surprised about, is that in Judaism, sex isn't all about procreation. So sex is very much seen from a pleasure lens in Judaism. The Talmud talks about, first off, the Talmud talks about that a man has to fulfill his wife sexually even after she has reached, menopause, right? So in a ketubah, for those who may not know, in a ketubah, which is the marriage contract, the thing that the man has to guarantee his wife, one of the things, is sexual fulfillment. So she has to have pleasurable sex. The other interesting thing with Judaism and sexuality is nada, like family purity laws. And so in Orthodox Judaism, when a woman is menstruating, this is a time apart from her and her husband until she's done menstruating. She goes to the mikvah, and then they can return to having sex again. Psychologically, and as a sex therapist, I would tell you this is very, very healthy, especially for couples who want to keep the spark and excitement alive in their sex lives.
So I had asked my friends questions before we did this interview. And one of them, I'm going to actually read the question because she asked about that. And I was like, all right, let's see where the conversation goes. But she said, Does why the time, okay, I don't think she's exactly right the way she said, why the 7 days after the period thing, does distance really make the heart grow fonder? And I think you're saying yes.
Yeah, I would. So I would say there's plenty of studies that have been done psychologically on relationships and relationship satisfaction. And, obviously, so to be fair, if you really, the law is really set up to where it puts a woman back in the bedroom at the time where she's ovulating. Like, so I mean, it is, right?
Yeah.
But to be fair, this is also the time for a lot of women when they really want their partner. Like, this is so they reignite with such areas of passion. The man, he's been without his wife for a while. So it really is a time to ignite passion in the relationship. So it is very healthy.
No, I mean, yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, I think like as a woman, sometimes if you are menstruating, it's like you feel so gross, at least.
But let me, and that's true. So for for
Yeah.
a lot of women, they do feel that way, right? Like they feel like, oh, I'm nasty, don't touch me anyways. Like, you know what I mean? Some
Yeah.
have the opposite. Some women have the opposite. They want to be touched. They're more turned on during that period, which is also very normal. But I think that the separation does a couple things for the woman specifically. One, it allows your time for your body to rest, right? Like you're giving your body the space. You don't have to worry about being sexy or, being fun and cute. Like you can let your body take the rest that it needs, whether it's physically or literally taking a nap. Like, you know what I mean? Like what your body needs. And I think that gives you a chance to pay attention to your body and be mindful of that. It also gives you a chance to be mindful of your partner, of other needs besides just physical needs. Like having that, when you can't have sex, you kind of have to have conversation, right? Like, so it's a way for you to really connect with your partner on that way, which I think is also very beautiful. And I will say for those who are listening, who are like, well, this is kind of sex negative, the woman's unclean, you can't touch it. I'll go back to what a scholar in Australia, a Christian scholar, his name is William Loader, and he really forefronted this area of studies of sex in the Bible, okay? And he makes a very clear point in one of his books that when a woman is talking about, when the Bible's talking about a woman menstruating, or when a man ejaculates, because after a man ejaculates, he's also in a state of uncleanliness, okay? This uncleanliness isn't a heaven or hell issue. It isn't good or bad issue. It is just identifying the state that you are in so that you know the next step. So like for a woman, she's then going to go to the mikveh. Same, and like you'll see a lot of ultra Orthodox, when the men have any type of seminal ejaculation, they go to the mikveh as well. So it's not a good or bad or somebody's better than the other. It's just allowing you to know where you are in your cycle so you can know the next steps to make.
So I'm remembering I feel like my rabbi or other rabbis always tell this story about a couple that's having trouble connecting, like a modern, a secular and modern couple, and they kind of like diagnose them, or they prescribe them with like Shabbat. So they're like, why don't you have Shabbat dinner every Friday and then you'll like talk. So I'm wondering if you ever have any like not very religious clients, and would you ever like prescribe them this, or just say, hey, this is in the Bible, it's available to you if you want to try it.
So, Rabbi Shlomo Karlibach always said, no one sleeps alone on Shabbos. So I often...
Well, I mean, not the Shabbat part, but the menstruation,
sure.
like following that law. Yeah, Shabbat, sure. I know there's another law on Shabbat.
There is, yes. There's a special blessing. It's a mikvah or a mitzvah to consummate. Yeah, so with clients, I do with religious clients, even if they're Christian, sometimes I tell them, in Judaism, it's very important. I would say that the Shabbat rule goes more towards scheduling sex. Because, for example, say a couple comes in and they're not having any sex, right? Like there's mismatched desire. That's where one partner wants to have sex more than the other. Maybe surprisingly to many of your listeners, it's often the woman who wants to have sex more than the man, which I know breaks down all the stereotypes that men only want to have sex. but I think in Judaism it's not surprising because it is the man's duty to sexually fulfill, and the Talmud goes into great detail of what that means and how often he has to do it. So for couples who have this mismatched desire, and we talk about like negotiating sex or how often they should have sex, I often recommend that they schedule sex, which for some couples, they're like, that's not sexy, that's not fun, to plan. We want to have spontaneous sex. And I always ask the question, do you ever have spontaneous sex? Like, think about when you first got with your partner, like you're thinking, oh, I want to be well groomed, I don't want to smell, I want to wear something that's sexy underneath my clothes. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're thinking this in the back of your head anyways. I don't know what the difference is.
You prep.
Yeah, you prep. Yeah, exactly. And so when you are scheduling it, you're prepping as well. Like you're thinking, this is where we're going to plan a nice night. We're going to okay. So I do encourage all of my clients to have sex on Shabbos. That is something I do encourage them, even if they're not Jewish. I encourage them to do this. And I do think it could be, it's very helpful in many ways.
We were talking about misconceptions, and I have to ask, like, the whole like sheet, sex in the sheet, like,
yes.
I'm like, first of all, I want to know like where that comes from. And like my friend made a joke about it the other day, and I was like, wasn't that dispelled? Like, why are we still talking about this? Like, where did this come from?
So it's funny because someone just told me yesterday that when they're in college and someone found out they were Jewish, that's the question they got from everybody.
Yes, it always comes up. But yeah, maybe if you could explain like what that is, the story, and like where it comes from, and if there's any truth to that.
So I don't know. I would there's the thing is in Judaism, for one question, there's probably like 50 opinions, right? Like that's what we do well. So I will give you a couple possible solutions. So in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about signs of virginity, and I know in certain cultures, even today in the Middle East and in other parts of the world where Jewish communities, they save the sheet from the wedding night, right? Because it had, okay, so.
I didn't know that.
Okay. And historically, if a groom made an accusation against his bride, her family would take the sheet and hang it outside the window as sign that they're, okay. This could possibly, so there is a connection with Judaism and sheets. Okay, I will say this, there is a connection with Judaism and sheets. However,
explain what I'm talking about, people think that like Jews have sex with like a sheet between them with a hole, right?
Yes. Now, for that part, I would assume that maybe somewhere someone saw people hanging out a talus, right? Like a talus katan, like like not a talus, not a big talus, but one you wear under your shirt, right? Mm-hmm. And so they see this with the hole where your head goes through, and then they think, oh, they're having sex with this. Now, those are two possible solutions. If you don't like those, make up your own. Like, that's interestingly, I will tell you, Jewish law is very specific on this, that you definitely cannot have a sheet according to Jewish law. Like halakha says that the bodies actually have to be touching. Law, we have a lot of laws about a lot of things, very specific laws, and that's even one of them is body touching during sex. It has to be. Right,
good to know. So I'm gonna say that if the sheet thing comes up again, I'll say, actually no.
Yeah, actually, halakha says our bodies have to be touching.
This question just popped in my mind because you're in Berlin, and I don't know if you watched the show on Netflix, Unorthodox.
I have not seen it. I do know what it is, or what it's about, but I have not seen it.
Yeah, I mean, it spoiler alert, she ends up in Berlin at a certain point, but the story takes place, I guess it's in Brooklyn, or anyway, she gets married very young, and like her and her husband are just having trouble like figuring out sex. And I mean, I don't know, because I'm not in this community and haven't experienced this personally, but I'm wondering if this happens, and and this brings me, and I do want to ask you about like things that come up with your clients, what kind of clients you have, but is that something common for new couples, just having trouble kind of
so we're talking like ultra-Orthodox couples and
I guess, yeah.
So yeah, there's a unconsummated marriages is a big issue. They have a lot of that's often a complication. The other complications for women particularly is vaginismus, which is pain during sex. Um, and for men, the issue is either erectile dysfunction or early ejaculation. Like that's often an issue. And for those who are like, what's the big deal about an early ejaculation? Well, in Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, a man can only ejaculate inside of the vagina. So this is why in a lot of ultra Orthodox couples, whenever oral sex is involved, it's always the man performing it on the woman, not the woman performing it on the man in case he ejaculates. He can only ejaculate inside of the vagina. So it's problematic because sometimes he gets a little excited and he never makes it, right? Like he never gets there. So, so those are problems that couples often have in consummating the relationship, and a lot of the reasons they have this. One of them is because they don't know how to move from a froom individual who I've never been able to touch a man before to now I need to let this man enter inside of me. Like this is like a lot of anxiety. Same with the man, right? The other area of anxiety is it is my duty to sexually fulfill my wife. And I have to do a good job of this, right? And so there's a lot of pressure. So there's a lot of anxiety and pressure on both sides of that. So it's often, this is very common among Orthodox or ultra Orthodox couples.
Yeah, I would think that's just a lot of pressure, a huge transition, and also like a lot of, I think, like excitement building up to the moment,
Sure.
like sexual tension.
Absolutely. So you see what I mean? Like, so I don't want people to think that these sexual issues are all because of negative things, because like you said, some of it is, I'm just so excited and I'm there and it's over. You know what I mean? Like we didn't even get started. So these are and for also for very religious clients, sometimes getting turned on is a little bit of a problem because you know, no offense, but when you're studying Torah hours and hours a day, you're studying, you know, the Daf Yomi, which for those who are listening don't know, this is the daily page of Talmud every day. You're reading. Some of this is not so sexy, right? Like some of this doesn't really put you in the mood for a good time later that evening. So, and even for women, you know, like it's sometimes difficult to be in the mood to even have sex.
I'm just like, something that I heard when you were talking about Cheva is a lot of people have shame around sex, like
Sure.
whether they're religious or not religious. It just happens to a lot of people, and and it seems, yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, it's not one size fits all, but how you kind of handle that with anyone, any type of client.
So it really determines where that guilt and shame comes from, right? So usually we'll go back and we'll have discussions about their family of origin. So I think about sex and human development in an ecological systems. I'm telling people are listening to this, they're going, I don't know what he's talking about. Why is he telling me all of this stuff? But an ecological systems theory manner, which views a lot of aspects that influence a person as far as their environment, their culture, their society, all of these things. So we might look at like family of origin, like what messages did you get as a child from your parents concerning sex? How did they model their relate? Now, obviously, they're not having sex in front of the children. At least they shouldn't be, or Child Protective Services needs to come in. But you notice things like, how are your parents holding hands? Do they kiss? Are they like, how do they interact? All of these are messages that we pick up in our development, like what we see on television, you know, what someone at school tells us, or all of what our religious institutions tell us. So we need to first see where that shame is coming from, and recognizing if it is about sex in general, or maybe it's only about certain areas of sex. And we need to identify it first. So that would be step number one. And then depending on what that is, depending on what we'll do next.
Yeah, no, I just think it's interesting because I think people think of sex as just sex,
Right.
and like sex is just this one thing. And I think it's more than just like the act of sex. There's a lot more to it.
so many nuances to sex and sexuality. Like it really impacts so many areas of our life, even when we're not aware of it and or either conscious of it, like how we interact with other people, how we see our world, how we approach our day. Like it's very important.
I'm wondering if you have any tips for talking about sex with a new partner.
Yes. So I know that a lot of people have these like numbers in their head when it comes to new relationships, right? Like, I got to wait 24 hours before I call or text this person, or, I don't want to kiss or have sex till the third date. Like all of these, it's like math formulas, like floating in the air, like,
Yes.
and the problem is this is all very much a one size fits all approach, right? Well, this is really robbing yourself and your partner of the uniqueness of your relationship. Just as they're a unique individual, the relationship that you have with them is a unique entity of itself. All right. So I encourage clients to ditch all of that. I don't think any of that is necessary or important. What I think is important is that a person does what's authentic and feels right for them and their partner, and in the process maintain their personal values and their partner's personal values. Don't do anything to compromise your values. That's when regret really comes in, like, because you don't want to regret anything either. Like, you don't want to regret anything. If your personal values, whatever they are in line with whatever you're doing, and you say, I want to text this person or I want to talk to this person about sex, talk to them about sex. I mean, you're sharing everything else in life. Why this is just as important.
Having sex on the first date, like, I guess I used to think it was this like horrible, like, omen where it's just like you're done after, but I think it's not as black and white as that. I don't know.
Again, I would say that it really is based on the person,
Yeah.
and their values and their intentions.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what's really important. I think we tend to overgeneralize a lot of people, right? Like we try to think, well, and that's another thing people bring into their relationships is they go, oh, in this past relationship, this happened with this guy or this happened with this girl. And then they judge and base all of their behavior with their new partner based upon these. And that's not really fair to your new partner now, is it? Like, that's not necessarily nice to do. And then you wonder why things aren't working. It's a big thing.
Yeah, I think I've definitely done that. I like put people in buckets and I'm like, oh, he's doing the same thing as that person.
Well, as a therapist, I hear this, and here's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering if there is, so I'll back up to say, I tend to approach things as, a lot of people say, oh, I got to find the one. I don't necessarily believe there's a one. I know there is some Jewish mysticism that says there is, but I'm not, let's be realistic. Like if there was a one and that one married someone else, then it's already ruined it for everybody else, right? Like this is already a problem. Okay. Like it's already ruined. So what I would say is that if you had come to therapy and you had told me what you just told me, I would say to you, why is it that you tend to be drawn to a certain type of person that may not be compatible for you? So, everybody likes to say, oh, that relationship's toxic. I don't really necessarily believe that. I just believe it's not as an issue of compatibility, and that you're not compatible with the person. Not saying that some people aren't toxic and terrible and horrible, but a lot of times. So I would say, why are you drawn to this personality type, which is not conducive to your personality type? You don't have to answer that now. I'm just saying this is something to think about.
No, I think that happens. I mean, and I see it with friends too. It's like, oh, you're just like dating the same person again. I mean,
my sister does that, and all the guys look the same too. They all look the same. Everything is about. I said, what are they, brothers? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I've been accused of that. But I think it's also, I listened to this podcast, which was interesting. I listened to a lot of podcasts about dating apps, and it was kind of like, the dating app is kind of just, it's like dictating like who you're meeting with. And so I'm like, is it really just technology like getting involved in my life? I don't know.
I will say that with Tinder or any of these dating apps, like, this isn't really a good way to meet someone, honestly, because I know everybody's meeting people in dating apps, But the pool of people that you are passing by that you've never had to have any type of connection with, okay? I'll put it in a way that people understand. Imagine you connect with someone on Tinder and you go on this date with this person. You're like, oof, like you immediately know, right? Like, yeah, this is terrible. Like, I thought they looked good in their photo, but this isn't working. You don't know this from the dating app. And there are other people who you may have passed up who maybe they're not photogenic. Maybe they picked a, like, let's be honest, especially with guys, like guys have no sense of anything, right? Like when it comes to like, oh, this is a good pick. Like that's why they need someone in their life. Unless, fortunately the gays have that under control, right? Like the more stylish area. Okay. So either the guy needs a woman in his life or a gay best friend to tell him, don't wear this, this photo is good, that photo, because left to our own devices, we'll pick terrible things. You understand? So maybe the guy picked a terrible photo, and we all know people who look terrible in photos.
Yeah.
But in real life, they look okay. And you're like, wow, what are you doing in front of the camera? So that's why I think dating apps are sometimes limiting the pool of people that people are selecting from, and sometimes not in a good way.
Yeah, I know. I keep thinking about it both ways. I'm like, on the one hand, I'm connecting with guys like I just wouldn't have met otherwise, because where would we have run into each other in the same social circles? But on the other hand, like I could be passing people up just based on like this little like picture.
Sure.
So, and also like someone in this podcast made this interesting point that you have like no obligation to treat people well. I mean, you do
Right.
as a person, but if you're just meeting someone who's like a literal stranger from nowhere on like an app,
Yeah.
you don't have like the same social circle. So you don't have any, like you don't feel this responsibility to like your community
Right.
to like, not ghost or like respond to them. So just in terms of like not responding to people on the app that like say hi, it's like, well, why would I? Like we literally have no one in common. There's no consequence. Whereas if like a friend sets you up with someone, you at least are going to be like decent to them because you don't
Sure.
want anything bad getting back to your friend.
And you're absolutely right. And you made another. So for people who are listening, we're like, well, where do I find someone if we're not
That was
on?
my next question.
Okay, but you already answered the question. You already answered yes, you did. You answered the question. You're like, they're not in my social circle, right? So I encourage couples when they say, well, where do I find someone? You need to grow as a person and move outside of your social circle. Like you need to expand that circle. And so that and it's good for you, not only relationship wise, but as a person, like growing as an individual and growing as a human, right? To expand that circle, to meet new people, go new places, do new things. And, I think that people who do that have an overall higher level of satisfaction in life in general. I'm not talking about relationships, but in life in general, because they're more, you maybe say they're adventurous or they're more willing to explore things, but it's because they're out and they're always willing to grow.
Yes. And I'll credit the podcast I was listening to about dating apps is, I think, sounds like a cult. And they were saying like, our dating apps culty, and it's a good podcast. I don't remember the names of the women on the podcast, but you reminded me. So there was a rabbi in New York, I think at
There's a couple of them
MJ.
actually, from what I
Oh
understand.
yeah. And they did like a I don't know what was it called, like the love game. They did some event, I think it was at MJE, and I ended up with a book by a rabbi, and it had kind of like I don't remember the title, but it was about like dating. It was like kind of a pun. Anyway, I read a few pages, but in the book he was like, the best way, I just thought this was so funny. The best way to set people up is to like set someone up with someone that you went on a date with and it didn't work out.
Okay.
And I cite this all the time because I was seeing someone and then, we broke up, and my friend was like, oh, I kind of we kind of liked each other. Could we go out? And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But also this rabbi in this book I read a few years ago was like, it's actually the best way, because even if you didn't work out with someone, you kind of like know what they're like and you know what your friends are like. So you actually know if they'll work out. So it's not weird. And it's a great way to set people up.
And it's funny because so many people, you have the bro code, or you have you know,
Yeah.
whatever, like we don't date our friends' exes. You know, that's a big thing. Like I hear so many women tell me this too, right? And I've had people come to therapy because they like somebody that they said they cannot date because their friend had dated them or whatever. And I think that's silly. Like, you know, you're supposed to be an adult at some point. And so you know, maturity is important and moving in these relationships. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. I also, you know, I like to invite people over for Shabbos to hook them up. Like that's
Me
something that
too.
I
It's never worked out for me, but I
it's
tried.
never, oh, I love doing that. I think it's wonderful.
I got ghosted the other day, so now I'm
You
like,
got ghosted or you ghosted the other person?
oh, you ghosted me.
Okay. That's not nice.
Yeah.
This really shows emotional immaturity on a person's part.
Hmm.
Like, this is the way you need to think about this. It really shows emotional immaturity on the other person's part that they cannot be upfront enough, or they lack the communication skills in order to tell someone, like, because they, you know, you could say nicely, you know, I really appreciate you. I don't think romantically this is going to work, whatever the case may be. Or the other thing I think it often shows is that you know, the person doesn't have this emotional intelligence to be able to be in any type of relationship. So do you really want to be with this type of person? You know, like, this is not who you want to be with anyways.
I have a question that someone asked.
Okay.
My sister asked. I won't forget it,
Keep
but
that in there.
yeah. She was like, ask him for tips for being a good lover. If and this is sort of related to like talking to your partner if you're getting into a relationship about sex, or even if you've been in a relationship for a while, any tips for that?
So communication is always key. Like, you need to be able to communicate. And I don't just mean, hey, honey, how are you doing? I don't mean saying, hey, I'd like to have sex. It's very important for you to be able to tell your partner specifically what you like sexually. Now, I know people listening, that doesn't sound very sexy. That's not how it is in the movies. You're 100% correct. That's not how it is in the movies at all, thankfully, because the movies show a lot of things about sex that are not accurate at all. And if we try to live up to that, like, you know, you're also not like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. You know, I'm not in the mafia as much as I like Al Pacino movies. Do you know what I mean? Like, the movies show us a lot of things. Movies are fantasy, right? Like, this is nice to get caught up in, but that's not how relationships work. Okay. So communication, you need to know what you like sexually. You need to be able to communicate that with your partner, just like they need to be able to communicate what they like with you, so that when you are together, you are able to fulfill each other's needs and wants and likes. I often tell couples it's very important to be able to experiment and try new things and to, you know, approach sex that way, right? I'm a big advocate of sex toys. So for couples who, not only for individuals to explore what they like sexually, but for couples who are like, you know, it's just, we're not excited. This isn't fun. You know, I think sex toys can be very helpful in helping couples to reconnect and to have more fulfilling sexual encounters. So if you want to be a good lover, you need to think about your partner and not yourself while you're having sex.
Good one. Maybe I'll add also that not everyone likes the same thing. Like,
100%.
if you were in a relationship and like certain things worked, you can't assume that it's going to work for like the next person.
And I would say, I would tag on to that. And I would say, just because something's working right now doesn't mean it's going to work in 10 years with that same partner. So we change as people. Like, the food you liked when you were 13, it's probably not your favorite food today, right? You know what I mean? Like, our tastes change, the things we like, our favorite movies change, our favorite songs change. So what we like and what we enjoy sexually changes, especially not only psychologically, because what we like changes altogether, but also physically. So our bodies change. So you need, now for people who are like, well, this sounds exhausting, but this isn't. This is like what keeps the excitement in the relationship alive, because just like when you're first in a relationship and you're having to learn all these things about your partner, that's what like gets the relationship going and moving and creates excitement. You have to continuously do this throughout your relationship. So the relationship does not have to lose the excitement or that sense of wonder that it originally had.
Yeah, I like that. See, I knew if I said something, you'd have something smart to add on. But I guess that makes sense, because they say that if you're in a relationship, you like grow together as people. So sex
Right.
is part of that. So there's a lot of buzzwords that come up. Like I said, I've admitted that I'm a big podcast person, Instagram person, and you hear the words like love bombing a lot. And so my question is two-part. A, like, what is love bombing? And B, are there any other, like, I know you're on social media too. Are there any other buzzwords that you keep hearing about sex or relationships that are like being used wrong or that need to be like decoded a little bit?
Yeah. So love bombing is one that is often used wrong. So love bombing at its core is basically when anybody is giving someone like an excessive amount of attention or affection, right? And so a lot of people liken this to like abusive situations, like where you treat the person really bad and the person's getting ready to leave, so you love bomb them, right? But that's true. Like that's still love bombing. But think about like early in your relationships, or when you're like trying to win this person's affection or this person's, you're doing all sorts of things, writing them love letters and poetry and love song. Like you're doing all this stuff to try to get them to like, and this is love bombing, and that's not necessarily bad. It could be very sweet, right? So I'm not a fan of a lot of these buzzwords because I think they lead to a lot of misconceptions. And we live in a day and age where social media is the popular means of disseminating information. And sometimes we're disseminating this information incorrectly. And I think it causes relationship problems. So, we talked a little bit about like gaslighting. Like, like you talked about ghosting, but the other one is like gaslighting. Like everybody's always talking about like gaslighting. And, this is when you psychologically manipulate someone to make them question their own sanity. However, people use this often for, blaming someone, or anytime they try to avoid responsibility, like, so it goes back to a lack of like mature and looking for an excuse to label something when you don't have a good defense. People do that often, and they're like, well, that's gaslighting. Well, it's not necessarily gaslighting. Maybe you are doing those things and you don't want to admit it or be honest about it, but that doesn't mean he's gaslighting you or she's gaslighting you because she brings it up and you don't have a defense for it.
No, definitely. And with the love bombing, I'm like, I've met guys and then they're just like complimenting me and I'm like, oh, and then like it kind of fizzles. So I'm like, was I being love bombed? And I get confused. I'm like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I
But
don't
isn't
think
it common like at the beginning of a relationship?
right. But then I think that maybe it's because the buzzword, because of past experience. I think I wonder if like they're being authentic. And I think that's
Right.
where dating is difficult. Like no matter if I think meeting on an app or even meeting someone in person, it's like hard to know how authentic someone's being. And maybe that's the thing that.
Well, I think that authenticity is what's often missing anyways, because I see so many clients who are, this goes back to sex and sexuality. They don't know how to be their authentic selves, right? They're worried what other people will think. Like some people have to even figure out, who am I authentically? Like, how do I want to be? Who am I? These are what people are figuring out, right? Like this is often complicated. I see so many clients who are like, I'm not comfortable with myself or who I am. I'm trying to figure out who I am. Or they know who they are, but they're afraid of displaying that into the world. And so I agree. I think authenticity is important. And I think when people reach the point, and I think that's what sex therapy really helps a lot of people, is to find their authentic selves. And this really increases self-confidence. And every woman listening, if you ask them what's the most attractive thing about a guy, they would say self-confidence. Not arrogance, but self-confidence.
I think it can really confidence can help overcome so many other things.
Sure.
For me at least. I'm like, because sometimes I met guys and I'm like, I don't know if you're my type, like physically, but then they're just like confident and I'm like, I'm charmed.
Yeah, that's a very important characteristic.
Yeah, for me, humor too is big, but it's
Humor is the other one. Do you know why? I'm going to tell you why I think this is. So I think it's because when it comes to sex, men are turned on optically. Like their sexual response begins at the optic nerve. Okay, so men are stimulated by what they see. Women often, not all, I don't want to but for many women, it is they need to feel comfortable with the person and they need to feel safe with the person. And so humor really helps that, right? Like if someone makes you laugh, you feel more comfortable with them, you feel more relaxed around them. Like you do, okay. So that's my best educated guess on why that is. And it's something I've talked about with clients quite a bit. So
my other theory, because the other day I was talking to people about if someone's funny, and I was like, I actually think anyone can be funny. So my theory is like you can laugh with someone if you like kind of vibe and get along.
Right.
So I think humor is attractive because it means that you like have a good you can, like,
Connection.
banter. Connection, that's the word. You have a
Yeah.
good connection and you can banter, and so that makes you feel like you'll connect in
And
other
it breaks down that those awkward, like in the beginning where it's not like, it's uncomfortable. Like humor breaks through that really easy. So it makes you more relaxed again, right? Like, so now you're comfortable with this person. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I didn't know we talked so long, but I actually kind of thought we would, because this is such, I mean, there's so much to talk about, but this was such a fun conversation. Where do people find you? What projects are you working on, etc.? Promote all your things.
Yeah, promote all my things. We'll be here all day if I'm promoting all my things. This would be ridiculous. So, of course, they can check out the Sex Therapy Podcast, which is available everywhere. They should follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Dr. Caleb Jacobson. Instagram particularly because it's connected a lot with my work with ACE. It's very interesting. If you do follow me, you'll be very surprised of the people who follow, because it's like rabbis and porn stars. Actually, that should have been the name of my podcast, was Rabbis and Porn Stars.
Yeah.
But a lot of the work I do there is on sex and religion. And I try to talk about these things in ways that aren't very raunchy or like, like turn people off. But also not too clinical. So I try to make it a little bit fun. So it is, it is not one of those accounts that you would follow that's not safe for work. You could open it for work. You could share it with your mom. You could share it with your coworker or whoever, right? Like it is not inappropriate content in any means. So follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Also, Sex Therapy Podcast. They could also visit sextherapypodcast.com and get a copy of a free book called 10 Tools to Improve Your Sex Life. And that's available on the website. So if there's anybody who is a therapist who is listening or who's interested in therapy, we launched the School of Sex Therapy in October, and they can visit schoolofsextherapy.com. We'll be beginning with several events. It is ASECT approved, and we will have approval from the American Psychological Association as well. So it'll be approved curriculum and programs. And so if you're interested in studying sex therapy as a whole program, or just wanting some sexual health information and working with people, or in general, we have that available.
Amazing. Is that school like virtual or in person?
Yeah, so it's hybrid. So even we will offer something. So like in December, we have a SAR, which is a sexual attitudes reassessment workshop. That's going to take place actually in person in Berlin. But most all of the content is available digitally, either in synchronous or asynchronous formats. So people from wherever can take part.
And you have a book too, right? That you were mentioning
Yeah, the book I was mentioning, Archaeology, the Bible, and Sex, but that will not be available till next year.
We'll just wait for it.
Yeah. Wait for it. And if you're a therapist, there's another book coming out next year called Sex Therapy with Religious Clients, Working with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Communities, available from Routledge.
Wow. Okay.
A lot of stuff.
You're doing a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is my pleasure.